Hello and welcome back to another special edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. My name's Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Tuesday, September 17th. We're starting a little special series of in-depth shows with our program today. We're going to be talking to all the candidates who are running for public office for the state representative districts around our area. And also we'll be holding a state senate forum as well at the Manchester Community Library on October 3rd. We hope all of you will be able to mark that in your calendars and try to make it there. That'll start at 7 p.m. that night on Thursday, October 3rd. But today we're going to kick things off with our conversations with the candidates who are running for state representative districts, and we're really pleased and honored to have with us Kathleen James, state representative, Kathleen James I should say, and Rob Hunter, who is running, the two of them are running together for the two seats representing the Bennington 4 district, and includes the towns of Manchester, Arlington, Sandgate, and a part of Sunderland, I believe the northwestern corner of Sunderland, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Something close to that, right? Anyway, Kathleen, Rob, great to have you here. Thanks for making the time for being in with us.
You bet.
All the other shows we're going to be doing in this little series will feature Republican candidates versus Democratic candidates, but you two, I guess, have the pleasure of running as Democrats with no Republican opponents. So
right.
I guess the outcome is fairly safe to call.
Depending on what we say today. Depending on what we say today.
We're not going to jinx anything here,
Right.
So I'll leave it there and just say we're really glad to have you in to talk about some of the main issues that I'm sure you've been hearing about on the campaign trail. You've been going around knocking on doors or whatever else people do these days. So our viewers can hear a little bit about what you're thinking about on some of the major issues. And I guess I thought we could get started by talking a little bit about what seems to be, at least from what I've been hearing anyway, topic A among voters in our area here, and that's the question around education and costs and property taxes. Yep. I'm sure that's nothing new to you both. You, I'm sure, have both heard a lot, probably, from folks you've been talking to. But I guess my question, just to kind of get things going, is we saw a fairly substantial increase this year in property taxes, driven by education budgets around the state. Originally, they were going to be in the 18 to 20% range. In the legislature, you were able to buy that down a little bit, but I guess as a rough statewide average, it still wound up being in the 10 to 12 or 13% range, which I'm sure was uncomfortably high for many people.
Yep.
So is this looking like a one-year, one-off kind of situation that was just the result of some special factors peculiar to this year? Or are we in a situation where we could be seeing those kinds of double-digit increases on into the future? And Kathleen, since you're the incumbent office holder, I'll let you get us started here. What is your sense of that? Are we looking
Actually, I'm going to dish it over to Rob.
Okay, sure. We'll let the new guy field this one.
Okay.
And Kathleen can back clean up. Well, let me just start by saying this. You know, after a 32-year teaching career, it's a little strange to sort of be on this side. You know, I mean, typically you get your teaching assignments and you do your job, and you don't think too much about the budget. But here are some things that we know, right? That teachers are almost promised you'll never get rich if you do this job. However, you're guaranteed certain benefits. In Vermont, it's a pension, and health care. You know, is one of those things that teachers get. And although I will say that there are a lot of teachers in this state that are paying more and more toward their premiums, we were lucky at Burton. We have not had to go there yet. And again, I know I'm speaking like I'm still there. I'm not. I'm retired. But when health care goes up, somebody's got to pay for it, right? So I guess where I'm going is that there are certain factors, and this may go to your question. There are certain factors that we can't control. Healthcare costs, right? It's huge. They keep going up, which of course in and of itself is is a problem, right, that needs to be looked at nationally, right, about healthcare costs. Another thing that has changed in the landscape, and I would say over my 32 years of teaching, mental health care for kids. And this is a whole nother sidebar situation that we could, explore. And there's been many articles and all kinds of stuff written about the rising rates of anxiety and depression among teenagers. And so the cost that's associated with that, of course, is clinicians in the schools. And I know that COVID money helped fund some of that, but of course that money dried up. Schools are having to put out for that as well. Here's another interesting thing that we know, and we all know this because we were at the Sunderland meeting, or zooming in. While some things may make sense, like say merging schools or newer and fewer, boy, you start talking about that. I mean, here you have a superintendent with a good head on her shoulders saying, hey, folks, I'm not saying we need to do this, that, or the other thing, but here are the numbers, here are the facts. And how long was that line? Right? People giving testimonials about, how this school changed their lives and how dare anybody want to change it. So I guess what I'm saying is there are rising costs in many areas in education. And so, when the towns came up with their budgets, they're trying to figure out how to pay for all this stuff. And so these are issues, I guess, of things that we actually know. And will these costs come down in the coming years? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
Well, we talked, as you could tell, Rob and I talked about this a little bit ahead of time, and we thought it would be important for Rob to set the stage because he's a classroom teacher with a lot of experience, and he speaks from, a platform of like, hey, I've been there. I've seen what it's like to be a teacher in our schools. You asked about property taxes, Andrew, and this, whether this was a one-off, and Vermont's education funding system has a catch-22, I think, built into the very heart of it. And there's a tension between local control and legislative action. And I think folks, by and large know this, but every year all over the state, hardworking, very responsible school boards get together. They develop a budget, they bring it to the voters vote on the budget. Around here, overwhelmingly, almost always to approve it. And then the baton passes to the legislature. The legislature adds everything up, and our job is to set tax rates at a level that will deliver those dollars, those voter-approved dollars, to the voters. So this year we were looking at projected increases in school spending because of the factors that Rob talked about, of more than $200 million in additional costs. That's where we were getting, Andrew, the projected tax rates. At one point it looked like they would be as high as 20% higher. Totally unsustainable, not anything that voters can continue to afford. So what did the legislature do this year? This year I feel comfortable that we took the steps that we could responsibly take to try to bring down tax rates this year. So we took our reserves, a responsible amount of reserves. We took projected excess revenues. We used that to buy the tax rate down a little bit. We created some new sustainable revenue streams into the education fund through a cloud tax and a new surcharge on short-term rentals. And altogether, we put together a package that boosted the ed fund by about $90 million and brought those average tax rate increases down to 13%. I don't think anybody's going to call that a win. We did everything we could. The governor did come in at the last minute and proposed buying down tax rates by another maybe 3-4% by borrowing money. The legislature didn't take him up on that idea. That would have put us into a deeper hole starting this year. So what do we do going forward? I think that's where you were going with all of this. We've got a report coming to us. We set up a group of very smart people to work on coming up with solutions. we've got a report coming to the legislature in just a couple months on short-term cost containment measures. So I think that an issue that will dominate the legislative session in 2025 will be, what can we do right now to try to rein in the cost of education? We've got a report due a year after that about what transformative structural changes can we make to fix this problem in the long run. I think we'll be looking at things like whether it's fairer and I guess easier for Vermonters to pay for school based on income rather than property taxes. I think we might be looking at some kind of a block grant system. And I think we're going to need to take a look at, as Rob mentioned, sort of how many school buildings do we run, and how do you qualify if you're going to get state money for school construction or for school renovation. How do you qualify for that money? And it might be some sort of newer and fewer sort of trigger, and I don't really know. Another thing I think that Rob and I are going to be on the front lines of is, in the midst of all of this, making sure that we're doing what we can to protect our town tuition program, because that's under fire, it's under attack, and I think Rob and I both know firsthand and feel very strongly about wanting to make sure that we can keep public dollars flowing to independent schools like BBA and Long Trail that offer a really outstanding education to our local students.
Are you feeling that that really is under assault, that whole system, that really is a danger, that towns or districts that don't have independent schools like Long Trail or BBA and say, well, wait a minute, why should we be doing this, particularly in the wake of that Supreme Court decision, or the Carson-Macon decision from a couple of years ago? Is there really that much money to be saved by doing that?
So that's a really interesting way to put it. Is it really under attack? 100%. Is there that much money to be saved? I don't think so.
I don't think it's about money.
Yeah, and I don't think it's primarily what, here's a great example. One thing that folks who are very critical of the town tuition program often point to right off the bat is public dollars flowing out of state, right? So the thought of somebody taking public tuition dollars and going to a boarding school in California or Sweden. And I honestly think, I think it's not a no-brainer, but I think it would be relatively easy to say, all right, let's take a look at that part of town tuition. Is that really where we want our public dollars going? But that's $4.5 million. So we could shut that down tomorrow, and it would not make a bit of a difference to our property tax rates. I think where the conversation is really going to revolve is public tuition dollars flowing to independent schools that may not live up to the standards that we all want our independent schools to live up to. So, how do people feel about public school dollars flowing to religious schools? That's a conflict with our Vermont state constitution. And so I think that the challenge is going to be how can we keep public school dollars flowing to schools like BBA and Long Trail while trying to take a really hard look at public school dollars flowing to schools that are religious, that may discriminate, that may not deliver the same quality of education that schools like BBA and Long Trail do. And that's where the argument's going to play out. And what's really interesting is that while there are a lot of communities that have choice, I think 80 plus communities have some version of a town, they send in some way. That's a lot of towns, but they're largely two main regional pockets, right? So we've got a really robust town tuition program down here in Bennington County, up in the Northeast Kingdom, St. Johnsbury, But you have a lot of legislators who really care about education, who care about our kids, who are coming to this from districts that don't have and have never had a town tuition program, and so they just don't have the same mindset. They care just as much as we do,
Right.
but they're coming from 100% public operating districts, and so they just don't have the same perspective on it as we do.
So this is a really interesting area to talk about, and we could easily
Sure.
spend our entire time here talking about it. But before we move on into a couple of other areas, I did want to just ask, or sort of throw one other thought out. So it sounds like what we have here is like sort of a two-part situation going on. We need to find some sort of immediate relief of some sort next year
Yep.
in the legislature, while at the same time that commission you refer to, working on the future of public education in Vermont, I
Right.
think is the formal title, comes up with a longer-term overhaul, for lack of a better term, of the way we finance education in Vermont. That report won't be available till later next year. One question I had on this, though, is just to ask if it's possible to move the mental, psychological supports,
Got that.
the cost of paying for that, or come
Yes.
out of the education fund.
Well, there's an yes.
Financed
There's
by
an
property
idea for that.
taxes.
There's a bill for that.
Yeah.
Could we not separate that out, put that at make that paid for in the general fund, which
Right.
has a variety of revenue streams,
Yes.
shrinking the size of the education fund, shrinking the size of the property taxes that would need to go finance
Right.
that?
Right.
Is that a kind of project that could happen in one session of the legislature, or is this a extended conversation that drags out over
Boy, I hope not.
multiple years?
I don't think so.
Do you think?
So how quickly that could happen, I don't know. Whether that's a really promising idea, yeah. I introduced a bill a couple of years ago. I'm not a big bill introducer, but so the first big bill, and to this date the only bill that I developed, drafted, and was the lead sponsor on, presented on the floor and saw all the way through. Plenty of bills that we get to vote on and work on and put our names on and stuff, but it was a community schools bill. And the community schools model is a really promising model. And one of the many things that it contemplates is the thought that schools are increasingly already becoming institutions in our communities that deliver social services, right? And so whether schools could become a place where social services are sited or co-located, but not necessarily, solely the responsibility of the school.
Right.
So I've talked to UCS about this, and they would be very interested, I think, in a model that moves mental health supports out of the education fund, off of the back of property taxpayers, into the general fund. Are we all still paying for that? Yes, we are, but it's a
Right.
much less painful,
Yeah.
broader base way of paying for social services. And, look at the UCSs of the world, locating their people. Then schools aren't competing for mental health counselors, and these services are available to students and funded in a different way that's less painful. I think what we're looking to do is find a way to fund our schools in a way that provides excellence without being so painful
Right. Right.
for all of us. And the property tax thing is, I think and I hope, seeing the end of its life cycle here in Vermont for
Right.
residents.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For all of us. Right?
Second homeowners,
Yeah.
businesses would still have to probably pay based on property taxes, but it's a great idea. I'm excited about it. I hope it's part of the future solution.
Yeah, well, I mean, thinking back to the debates over Act 60 and Act 68 and Act 46, those were not exactly quick conversations. When we're looking at a real top-to-bottom, revamping of how we do this.
Well, and they shouldn't be quick, right?
No, well,
I
yeah.
mean, these overhauling the way we fund and deliver education in Vermont should not be a quick conversation. As much as everybody wants, including us,
Right.
immediate property tax relief. I think that the top priority of the legislature in this next biennium is going to be education funding reform. I think it's going to dominate the conversations. And it's going to play out in two ways. What can we do right now to help people?
Right.
And then how do we do this better? And that part of it needs to be a thoughtful conversation. And as Rob mentioned, what played out in the Sunderland gym just a few nights ago
Boy.
is a great example of that tension. Everybody wants property tax relief, but if one way to save money, for example, is to close and consolidate,
Yeah.
that is a
Yeah.
tough conversation. And look at how folks in Sunderland felt about that.
Right, and and no disrespect meant. I mean, like for so many communities, the school is the heart of their community, and I get it. I'm not saying, hey, close the school.
Right.
And I just want to add this. I mean, I don't think that there was a legislature that went home in June last year thinking, no big deal about the taxes. I think that
Oh
you
my
guys.
God.
I mean, I think that was a big deal for everybody. And I guess I say that because I think I read something recently on a forum about the tax and spend Democrats, and I mean, I don't think anybody's happy about the taxes.
Well, I'm sure that's not a great way to win elections, right?
Nope.
I'm going to raise your taxes. Vote for me.
Read my lips.
Yeah.
The taxes. There you go.
Well, again, we could talk about this for quite a while longer.
Yep.
It's on one hand, a very fascinating subject, but let's move on and talk about another area that I'm sure you're hearing a lot about from folks you're talking to, and that's this whole question of the clean heat standard the legislature passed Act 18, the Affordable Heat Act, in 2023, and that required the Public Utility Commission to design a clean heat standard for approval by the General Assembly next year in 2025. So without going too deep into kind of where that's all at, I guess one of the issues that I've heard is this is going to cost a lot of money for oil dealers to convert over to becoming heat pump installers or solar installers or renewable energy businesses as opposed to fossil fuel businesses. They'll be setting up, and I'm sure Kathleen, you can describe this much better than I can, a whole market for credits. And without going too deep into that, I guess I just wondered, do you feel that accusation that this is going to be an extremely expensive changeover that will, again, on top of property tax increases, hit average working Vermonters
Right.
with yet more costs for their oil, propane, gas, whatever, at a time when a lot of people are going to be struggling anyway.
Yeah. So I guess I want to set the stage by saying the hardest way to make thoughtful policy and to talk to voters is when there's a aggressive atmosphere of misinformation. And that has been the case around the Affordable Heat Act. It's been really frustrating. I would say the last time I saw this level of misinformation and fear-mongering around a political issue in Vermont was when we had the reproductive liberty constitutional amendment on the ballot. And you saw people getting postcards from out-of-state super PACs that were just shockingly off base. And this feels like that to me. So I guess the most important thing to say about Act 18, and I'll correct a word that you used, Andrew, is
No,
that
please do.
in January the legislature will approve the clean heat standard.
Okay.
I will say in January the legislature will consider the clean heat standard.
Right.
So I'm getting folks coming up to me. They're getting postcards in the mail. They are getting flyers stuffed in their heat bills that are very wrong. So I was trying not to use the L word. So I think the most important thing to understand is that right now, most Vermonters are kind of at the mercy of what heating fuel costs. And our fuel dealers are kind of at the mercy of what fuel costs, right? And we saw a couple years ago the price of heating oil spiked by $2. I certainly remember getting that bill. And so I think that what the legislature is trying to acknowledge is the fact that all around the world and all across the country, the heating market, the fuel market is shifting, right? Like people are moving to renewables. Right now, people who can afford to weatherize their homes or install heat pumps or put in a wood pellet stove, they're doing that because clean heat is cheaper, it costs less. And the people who can't afford to do that are getting left behind. And that's going to accelerate in the coming years. So the idea that the Affordable Heat Act is considering is whether we should put into place kind of a gradual, predictable program that would make clean heat more affordable for a lot more Vermonters. That's the motivating idea. Yeah. How it would work if we ever pass it is that companies that import fossil fuels into Vermont, fuel dealers, would be required to earn a certain number of credits. They would earn credits by helping Vermonters who are interested, Vermonters who want to, do things like weatherize their home, install heat pumps. And a lot of those credits would be targeted at or available to low and moderate income Vermonters. So the folks who can least afford to do this would be able to go on to something like Efficiency Vermont and see that they could weatherize their home, they could put in a heat pump for way less. The big question is, would fuel companies help cover those costs by raising the price of heating fuel? They probably would. We don't know how much. And we don't know how much the heating fuel market will change in the interim, right? So what the Affordable Heat Act did was two things. It commissioned a bunch of studies to try to get the numbers in hand, and it asked the Public Utility Commission to kind of draft the rules for this. Like, what would this look like? If we do this, what would it look like? When the legislature comes back in January, basically all those things are going to be delivered to our desks, right? We're going to have a bunch of studies, we're going to have draft rules, and the question is, now what? We could do three things. We could decide that the numbers don't look good and the idea doesn't work and we can't make it work, and we could leave it alone and just kind of skip it. We could revise it heavily to see if we could make the program work, or we could pass the rules as is, that's kind of a non-starter. So my guess would be that Vermonters can look forward to months of public hearings, public testimony, ability to provide feedback, and we'll see whether anything comes to a vote.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there's been a lot of hysterical commentary around this. I've read some of it.
Yep.
And,
It feels hysterical to me.
A lot of people
yeah.
are projecting, I think $9 billion is what number I saw in a recent report. They would raise the costs around the state, and whether or not that's accurate or wildly overblown is another.
You're talking about the September 3rd potential study. It was one of the pieces of data that the legislature is going to have to look at. So that study showed, I think, $9 billion in costs over some number of years, $12 billion in savings over that same number of years, to a $3 billion net. And it's so in other words, if we do this, we would wind up $3 billion ahead. And it's really important to know too that study, which I said is basically just going to be a bunch of data dumped on the desk of legislators to say, well, here's here's one important thing to look at.
Yeah.
The costs. I think that people who oppose this program are trying to make Vermonters think that that's $9 billion in costs that we're all going to have to pay.
Yep.
Cost would be if to reach a certain goal, right? Let's say we'd have to weatherize X number of homes, install X number of heat pumps, do this number in wood pellets. The total cost of getting all that work done would be maybe $9 billion. So who pays that? Well, federal incentives, right? All the federal dollars flowing in. Whoever's getting that work done would be, maybe it costs me
On the hook for some of it.
$1,000 to, to weatherize my home, so I'd chip in my part. State incentives. So I think people are really misunderstanding what we're even talking about when we talk about costs and who would pay for that and how we'd pay for it. And so I keep thinking of the Affordable Heat Act as like a machine, and it has a bunch of levers. And when we come back in January, we'll start looking at whether we want to build that machine and how we can adjust all those levers, and whether we can, in the end, have it be a machine that turns out a program that helps people save money on their heating fuel and gets Vermont to where it wants to go in terms of a more sustainable future. And if we can make it work, I think that's fantastic. But the belief that there's some surcharge or carbon tax kicking in on on January 1, or that we're going to be voting up or down on this in January, is fear-mongering. It's completely inaccurate. It's scaring people. I think it's really irresponsible. And like I said, it feels like when we were voting on Prop 5.
Are we allowed to say Americans for Prosperity?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so that's, it's the Koch brothers, and of course it's big oil interests that of course are pushing that agenda. And one candidate here, again, and you've probably seen them sending out flyers to voters with misinformation about this. And one thing that I'm really excited about going to Montpelier is my forward-thinking colleagues in the Democratic Party. So I guess I see the clean heat standard as a recognition that we're in a time of transition, right? I mean, we're going from when we were all kids and cars with blue exhaust coming out to, right, EV vehicles and clean electric and all of that. So I really have to give a lot of credit to the legislature right now, because they're saying, okay, the next 20 years are going to be huge, right? I mean, 11 years from now, they won't be selling gas-powered cars, brand new ones, in Vermont anymore, and a bunch of other states. So we're in this time of transition. So, and if the clean heat standard doesn't work out in January, we say, because nobody's going to be okay with all of us, $3 more on the gallon of oil. Nobody's okay with that. But I think what's really cool is that if it doesn't work out, we're going to say, okay, that didn't work out. Let's brainstorm some other ideas, right? Because we are in this time of transition. I mean, to say, we're not changing, the world isn't changing. I mean, it's 2024. Like we're moving forward. We have to embrace that. And I really love that attitude of embracing that future and trying to do right by Vermonters. And I get really miffed with, this sort of fear-mongering and, this multi-billion-dollar organization coming in saying, hey, keep your oil the way it is. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, well, it's a super complicated subject, and
It is.
and a fascinating one as well, and of course very timely. I mean, we've seen in the last couple of years, unprecedented flooding, weather patterns that are very unusual, and the argument could be made that, well, if we want to get out of that box, we want to go forward on a clean heat standard approach. So you have this sort of tension between the short term and the long term. You need to do something that may cost a little bit more upfront, but will pay dividends many times over further down the road. And But getting from here to there is the hard part.
Getting
Yep.
from here to there is always the hard part.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, again, we could probably talk about this for
Yeah,
another half
absolutely,
an hour.
absolutely.
But in the time we have left, I just thought we'd switch to another topic, which I know has been not breaking news by any means to anyone, and that's the whole housing issue.
Yes.
Cost of housing around here seems to be going in one direction, up, and
Right.
availability of houses, apartments, rental situations, whatever is
Yep.
tighter and tighter. Every employer I've ever talked to, when the subject comes up, says I had a great person I wanted to bring in for this job, and they couldn't afford to find a place
Sure.
to live here. So, the housing situation, again, is one of these super complicated
Yep.
issues. There's no easy, obvious answer. If there was one, we would have done that 20 years ago when
Yep.
this all sort of began to raise its ugly head. But what are your thoughts about housing? I mean, what can we do,
Right.
or can the state do,
Right.
in sort of a relatively near-term time frame, to at least begin to soften how difficult it is
Right.
for people to either find a place to live or
Right.
move here? I mean, we all want the economy to grow, and that means more people coming to live in the state.
Right. Right. Well,
What are
I
we
think
gonna do?
I think you're acknowledging that this is an issue, and this has been an issue in Vermont. I mean, I know that. So Nancy and I moved here in 1996. We rented an apartment with 2 little kids and a dog down in Arlington. Lived there for 2 years. Came up, lived in one of the dorms at BBA for another 3, and it was 5 years really working here before we could afford a house, and that was 2001. And and I gotta say, it was actually a mortgage company that really, they had a program for teachers, like a 0 down. And we joke like that we bought the last shack in Manchester, and I mean, we could barely afford it. I mean, we were probably months before Nancy was gonna go back to work. She was with the girls when they were little. And it was $115,000. It was a 3-bedroom ranch. God, if there could only be some of those. But I mean, with one income at that point, we were hanging on by a thread anyhow. I think my starting pay was $33,000. Now that was 5 years experience and a master's degree coming in. So and things have gotten, as you know, exponentially worse. And we don't want to blame the COVID refugees for that. No, it was going to happen anyway. I'm joking when I say that. Just real estate through the roof. But it's a national problem. This is across the board. I want to say generally there are some good things happening, and I think Seth Bongartz did a lot of good work with Act 250 to try to loosen up things for the next 3 years so that residential properties can be built without so many hurdles, right? So that'll be over the next 3 years. I think generally too that the state does what it can do in terms of building shelters, affordable housing, usually for elderly and that sort of thing, disabled. But of course, the state can only do that at a rate that it can afford. So, and obviously talking about education, all of the other expenses in front of us, I'm sure that at the end of the year, there's not much left in the state's wallet for that. But you also know some other things.
Yeah, so it's sort of like, so what's working, right? Like Rob explained that we can make it easier for people to build, for the market basically
Right.
to build in a regulatory sense. And then for those who are most vulnerable, we can build, and we do, using the state money that we have available. So there are some programs that I'm especially excited about that I think have been most successful. The VHIP program, that's a program that the legislature pumps money into every year. And it gives property owners grants, forgivable loans to convert rental units that are offline, basically because they're not up to code, and create more affordable rental units like apartments, right? And so there are property owners certainly in Manchester in our district who've used that VHIP money to create affordable rental units. There's a lot of VHIP money that's been successfully used by Zach Hale and others down in Bennington to get more rental units online. So VHIP's a program I like a lot. There's a missing middle program that the state stood up and funds every year that targets folks that are more in that missing middle bracket. So earning, 80 to 120% of area median income. And it's a little bit of a struggle to find the money for that every year. But again, that's state support to build rental units and housing for folks that earn. What we're trying to do is figure out how we can help create more housing, not just for our lowest income folks, but for folks who are in that bracket that, maybe doesn't qualify for subsidized housing, but they earn just too much. They can't afford to buy, they can't afford to rent. So that, and I think one thing we've learned is that getting housing built really takes local leadership. Up in Montpelier, we're trying to work on Act 250 and create a promising regulatory environment, and we're dumping big dollars into these buckets. But ultimately, it takes local developers, local select boards, local housing task forces to say, hey, let's apply for this grant. Let's put our weight behind this project. St. Albans has been a real leader, I think, in the city, the select board, and the town manager really taking the lead. In St. Albans, the town buys property, they get it ready for building, and then they work a deal to turn it over to private developers. And that's a really successful model. Here in Manchester, we've got our Housing Task Force version 2 up and running. I feel confident that they're going to be able to make a difference. Woodstock has done a lot with local housing, local leadership, saying like, hey, let's apply for this VHIP money. Let's see what we can do to help folks build ADUs. And even short-term rental regulations. We have tried and failed at the state level to get a statewide approach to STRs. We are running into a brick wall with that. So right now that's happening on a patchwork town by town basis. Towns deciding to take a look at how they handle STRs within their, basically within their town limits. And I think another thing that we need to do is to continue to build up our skilled trades. I think we need to do everything we can to support students entering the building trades, entering the construction trades, becoming electricians, becoming plumbers, because those are high-paying, career, family-supporting careers that I think keep our high school grads in Vermont, and that's another thing we want to do. So I'm a big fan of the building trades, and I do that in my real job at the Vermont Community Loan Fund as well. So,
well, yeah, it's the whole housing question is really fascinating to me. I find myself wondering, well, what can government really do on this? I mean, you've got labor costs and construction costs that they are what they are, and they've been going upwards pretty regularly for the last few years. So really, it's in the regulatory arena of zoning issues or whatever, where it's the only real leverage that government has to say, hey, we're going to make it easier for you to build on this lot over here if you would like to and think you can make some money out of it.
Yeah, it's a dilemma. I mean, in my, like I said, in my real job, I watch the amount of financing and creative thinking it takes to build up, a financing stack that can make one home affordable for one family through like Habitat for Humanity or what the city of St. Albans is doing. And, I think we need to figure out how to get, our towns involved in thinking creatively and building, denser, more affordable units in kind of vibrant, livable, walkable downtowns. I think that's the future, and I hope that we keep moving in that direction.
Okay, well, we'll have to both you back just to talk about housing, because, I mean, you could also look at the whole issue of a lot of the housing stock in the state is pretty old. A lot of it needs to be fixed up. A lot of it was built for multi-generational families.
Right.
Yeah.
We tend to not do that anymore, although maybe we're going to wind up doing it
Going
again.
back to that, right?
Back to the future. Yeah.
Right. Well, we're going to have grandma and 3 generations in one roof.
Right.
Nothing
Anyway,
wrong with that, by the way. Yeah.
there's something to be said for it.
Yeah.
But whatever. We'll leave that for the next time.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we've run out of our time for today, but I wanted to thank both of you again for making the time for this.
Thank you.
Kathleen
Yeah.
James, Rob Hunter, candidates for the Bennington 4 State Representative District in Montpelier. And well, I guess the election's what, November 5th? But voting is
5th.
already underway.
Yes.
November 5th.
The ballots are going out soon, right?
Ballots should arrive by October 1. So, yep, it's a mail-in year, so everybody should receive their ballot in the mail. The Secretary of State's office says by October 1. You can also go and vote early at your town clerk's.
All right. Well, great. Well, thank you for being the first group of folks in here to talk about election
Overachievers.
There you go.
Later this week, we're going to be having Representative Dave Durfee and his challenger, Victor Harwood. They'll be running in the district that includes Shasberry and the other part of Sunderland. That's not part of the Bennington 4 district. And following that, we'll be having Chris Morrow and Jan Payne, who are running up in the, I guess you could say, the Mountain Towns districts. There will be Wenhall, Weston, Londonderry, and Andover. And then we'll finish things off on October 4th with Representative Mike Rice and his challenger, Sandy Pensino, for the Dorset, Danby, Landgrove, Peru, Mount Tabor district.
You're great.
Wow,
Boy,
that
you're
was
good.
impressive.
You're good.
That's hard, remember all of those.
You're good.
Anyway, well, thanks to all of you who've been with us today. Hope you found the program interesting, and we'll see you again the next time. Meanwhile, take care.